Today is Tuesday, December 30th, 2025. Take a moment to look at the calendar and let that date settle into your mind. We are standing precisely 48 hours away from the most violent structural shift in the history of the global precious metals market. While the world prepares for New Year celebrations, a systemic seizure has begun behind the closed doors of the global financial elite. What we witnessed this morning was not a random market fluctuation or typical year-end volatility. It was a coordinated fracture. It was a glitch in the matrix that proves the Western paper system has finally run out of time, while the Eastern physical market has officially run out of metal. At exactly 8:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Federal Reserve executed an emergency, unscheduled liquidity injection of $3 billion into the repo market. There was no press release. There was no public debate. They simply opened the floodgates and pumped $3 billion freshly printed dollars into the veins of a dying banking system. At that exact same moment, half a world away, the Shanghai Gold Exchange recorded one of the largest physical silver withdrawals in its history. 1,318,186 troy ounces of silver vanished from the public vaults. That is 41 tons of physical metal removed from the system in a single morning. Do not believe in coincidences. In the world of high finance, there are no accidents, only action and reaction. In New York, the Fed is printing digits to save a paper illusion. In Shanghai, China is vacuuming up atoms to secure a physical reality. These two events occurring simultaneously just 2 days before the massive China export ban tells you everything you need to know. The main beam of the global financial structure has cracked. We are watching the messy, violent divorce of price from reality. For years, the experts told you that silver was just another commodity, a sideshow to the stock market. They told you the price on the screen was the only price that mattered. But today, the screen lied and the vaults spoke the truth. The sound you hear is the sound of a 4,000 to 1 leverage ratio reaching its mathematical limit. This morning, at 8:15, a major financial entity likely woke up to a margin call that threatened to trigger a systemic collapse. They needed $3 billion not for investment, but for survival. They are fighting a war with liquidity, while the East is fighting with gravity. And as any student of economic history knows, gravity always wins. This is an emergency briefing for the serious investor. Over the next 30 minutes, we are going to dissect the mechanics of this collapse. We will look at why the Fed panicked, how China is front-running the total lockdown of the silver supply, and why the $5 spread between New York and Shanghai is the smoking gun of a failed manipulation. If you are holding silver, do not let the noise of the paper market shake your resolve. The suppression game is over. The architects of the system are no longer in control. They are terrified. They are not smashing the price because they are strong. They are smashing it because the floor has dropped out from under them. Welcome to the final 48 hours of the old financial world. To understand the gravity of the $3 billion injection that occurred at 8:15 this morning, we must look beneath the surface of the headlines and into the plumbing of the global banking system. We are talking about the repurchase agreement market, commonly known as the repo market. This is the hidden heart of the financial world where banks and hedge funds exchange high-quality collateral for overnight cash. In a healthy economy, the repo market is silent. It is a routine process where liquidity flows like water through well-maintained pipes. But this morning, the pipes burst. The Federal Reserve does not intervene in the repo market on a Tuesday morning without a catastrophic reason. Usually, these operations are scheduled weeks in advance. When the Fed suddenly appears off cycle to pump $3 billion into the system, it is the financial equivalent of a doctor rushing into a patient room with a defibrillator. It tells us that a major institution, a pillar of the New York financial establishment, suffered a cardiac arrest. This entity went to the private market to borrow cash, and for the first time in years, the other banks said no. They saw the collateral, they saw the exposure to the silver market, and they refused to lend. The details of the collateral used for this bailout are even more disturbing. According to the data on the terminal, $2 billion were swapped for United States Treasuries, but $1 billion was swapped for mortgage-backed securities. Why does this matter? Because it shows that the distressed entity was scraping the bottom of its barrel. They were pledging illiquid, lower-quality assets just to get their hands on cash before the market opened. This was not a strategic move. This was a desperate attempt to meet a variation margin call. We know that the big four commercial banks in the United States hold massive, concentrated short positions in the silver derivatives market. For decades, they have sold promises of silver they do not own to keep the price suppressed. But as the physical supply in the East vanishes, the volatility has become unmanageable. Their risk models are exploding. When the silver price refuses to stay down despite massive paper selling, the clearinghouse demands more cash as collateral. If that cash is not delivered by the opening bell, the position is liquidated, and the silver price would gap up by $20 or $30 in a matter of minutes. The Fed stepped in at 8:15 a.m. to prevent that gap up. They printed $3 billion to stop a short squeeze from becoming a systemic default. But here is the fatal flaw in their plan. You can print $3 billion, but you cannot print a single ounce of silver. By bailing out the shorts, the Fed has only delayed the inevitable while making the eventual crash much more violent. They have proven that the entire New York silver market is on life support. Without the printing press, the COMEX would have collapsed this morning. This is no longer a free market. It is a state-sponsored illusion designed to protect the banks from their own fraudulent leverage. As we move forward, ask yourself this. If the system is so robust, why did it require a $3 billion patch job on a random Tuesday? The truth is that the leverage has become a suicide pact. The banks are trapped in their own shorts, and the Fed is the only thing keeping the ceiling from falling in. But while New York was focused on paper liquidity, Shanghai was focused on the only thing that actually matters in a crisis: physical possession. While the Federal Reserve was frantically printing paper to patch a leak in the Western banking system, the real story was unfolding in the loading docks of the Shanghai Gold Exchange. We have to look at the other side of the ledger. The Fed deals in credit, but China deals in metal. At exactly 9 a.m. local time, just 45 minutes after the liquidity panic in New York, the Chinese industrial complex executed what can only be described as a vacuum operation. The warehouse reports from the Shanghai Gold Exchange are clear. In a single morning, 41 tons of silver were physically withdrawn from the exchange vaults. To visualize the scale of this, 41 tons is 1,318,186 troy ounces. This represents roughly 40 massive pallets of 1,000-ounce bars. This was not a paper shuffle or a digital transfer between bank accounts. This was load out. This was an armada of armored trucks backing up to the exchange, loading the bullion, and driving it away into private, state-controlled storage facilities. It is gone. It has been removed from the global circulating supply forever. Why this sudden aggression? Why withdraw 41 tons on a Tuesday in December? Because the smart money in the East is looking at the same calendar you are. They see the January 1st deadline. They know that in exactly 48 hours, the export ban goes into effect. These new laws are not just about stopping silver from leaving China. They are about tightening state control over every ounce inside the country. The battery giants, the solar conglomerates, and the strategic reserve managers are front-running the lockdown. They are vacuuming the floor clean because they know that on Thursday morning, the gates will be bolted shut. This massive withdrawal has devastated the inventory levels at the Shanghai Gold Exchange. The new warehouse totals are terrifying. Total registered silver inventory in Shanghai has dropped to 755 tons. While that may sound like a large number, you must realize that China consumes thousands of tons of silver every year for its industrial machine. 755 tons is a historic low. It is the red zone. This represents barely a few weeks of industrial demand. The cupboard is effectively bare. If another entity demands 50 tons tomorrow, the exchange will break. We are witnessing a total lack of confidence in the Western price. While the COMEX in New York is trying to hold the paper price at $75.32 using Fed bailouts, the physical price in Shanghai has completely detached. The buyers in the East are laughing at the New York price. They are happy to pay a massive premium just to get the metal into their possession before the supply chain locks down. They understand that a paper contract cannot conduct electricity and it cannot build a satellite. China smells blood in the water. They saw the United States banking system stumble at 8:15 a.m., and they chose that exact moment to twist the knife. By draining the physical vaults while the West is struggling with liquidity, they are forcing a physical squeeze to coincide with a banking crisis. It is a pincer movement. The Fed is fighting a fire on the paper side, while China is pouring gasoline on the fire on the physical side. The buffer is gone, the safety net has been removed, and the final 48 hours of the physical silver market have begun. To truly understand why the price of silver is quoted at $75.32 instead of $100 or more, we must look at the casino floor in New York. We must look at the COMEX. While the Chinese were moving heavy bars of real metal this morning, the traders in New York were playing a digital video game. They were trading paper silver. The volume numbers that came out of the exchange today are not just anomalous, they are mathematical obscenities. I am looking at the final volume tally for Tuesday, December 30th. In a single trading session, the COMEX traded 276,000 contracts. Now, let us do the math. Each contract represents 5,000 ounces of silver. 276,000 multiplied by 5,000 equals 1,380,000,000 ounces. Let that sink in. 1,380,000,000 ounces traded in just 6 hours. That is nearly 2 years of global mining production traded on a single Tuesday in December. Do you really believe that 2 years' worth of silver changed hands today? Do you believe that the mines in Mexico and Peru dug up 1.38 billion ounces overnight and shipped it to New York? Of course not. It is a fantasy. It is a digital illusion created by high-frequency algorithms trading the same paper contracts back and forth thousands of times a second. This is a storm of fake supply designed to drown out real demand. It is a mechanism used by commercial banks to dilute the price of an asset they do not actually possess. But here is the statistic that exposes the scam. Out of that ocean of 1,380,000,000 paper ounces, how many contracts actually resulted in a delivery notice? How many buyers said, "I want my metal"? The answer is 69. Not 69,000, just 69 contracts. 69 multiplied by 5,000 ounces equals 345,000 ounces. Let us look at the ratio. On one side, you have 1,380,000,000 ounces of paper volume. On the other side, you have 345,000 ounces of physical reality. The leverage ratio is exactly 4,000 to 1. For every 4,000 ounces of paper silver sold on the screen today, only one single ounce of physical silver actually moved. This is not a market. It is a fraud. It is a fractional reserve Ponzi scheme that makes the cryptocurrency markets look stable. They are diluting the price by flooding the world with 4,000 claims for every one bar that exists. That is basic economics. If you print 4,000 fake tickets for every one seat in the stadium, the price of the ticket collapses. But the stadium, the physical vault, is still empty. This fraud is exactly why the physical market has finally decided to divorce the paper market. The industrial buyers know that a paper contract is not conductive. You cannot put a futures contract inside a solar panel or a cruise missile. You need the atom. And they are now willing to pay any premium to get that atom before the paper illusion vanishes forever. We are now witnessing what economists call a bifurcation, a violent splitting of a single market into two irreconcilable realities. For decades, the global silver price was a unified number, dictated by the heavy trading volume in New York and London. But as of today, that unity is dead. The paper price and the physical price have officially filed for divorce, and the papers were served this morning through a $5.40 price gap. I am looking at the closing prices right now. In New York, on the COMEX screen, silver is quoted at $75.32. In Shanghai, at the gold exchange, the price has closed at an equivalent of $80.72. That is a premium of over 7%. In the world of institutional arbitrage, a 7% spread is not just a gap. It is a flashing neon sign that the system is broken. In a functioning free market, traders would buy silver in New York for $75 and sell it in Shanghai for $80 until the price is matched. This is the law of one price. But the arbitrage is not happening. Why? Because you cannot move what you do not have. The banks cannot buy at $75 in New York because there is no physical silver available for immediate delivery at that price. The COMEX price is a zombie price. It is the price of a leveraged promise that nobody expects to be fulfilled. Meanwhile, the Shanghai price of $80.72 is the real price. It is the price of a physical asset that is being hoarded by an industrial superpower. This bifurcation is the ultimate rejection of Western financial engineering. The industrial buyers in the East are looking at the screen in New York and laughing. They know that $75 is a lie maintained by the Federal Reserve and the printing press. They are willing to pay $5 more per ounce just to avoid dealing with the paper games of the West. They are paying a panic premium. They are saying, "I do not care what the chart says. I care about having the bars in my warehouse before the clock strikes midnight on January 1st. This $5 spread proves that the bridge between paper and physical has collapsed. When the premium reaches this level, it triggers a feedback loop. Every smart holder of silver in the West now has an incentive to demand physical delivery to capture that $5 profit. This puts even more pressure on the empty vaults in London and New York. The West is trying to hold the beach ball underwater with $3 billion of liquidity, but the East has turned the water into a vacuum. The divergence cannot last. History shows that when the physical price and the paper price split, the paper price eventually vanishes or gaps up to meet reality. You cannot leverage zero. As the vaults in Shanghai hit the red zone of 755 tons, the ability to manipulate the price through arbitrage disappears. We are approaching a moment where the New York price will become completely irrelevant to the global trade of silver. We are entering a world of two prices, a fake one for the gamblers and a real one for those who own the atoms. To understand why the current system is fracturing, we must look back at the graveyards of previous financial illusions. History is not a series of random accidents. It is a ledger of human attempts to defy the laws of supply and demand. Every time a central bank or a group of powerful insiders has tried to suppress the price of a hard asset, they have failed. And every failure has followed the exact same script we are watching today on December 30th, 2025. The first major lesson comes from the London gold pool of the 1960s. In 1961, 8 Western central banks, led by the Federal Reserve, formed a secret syndicate to suppress the price of gold at $35 an ounce. They believed they could print as many dollars as they wanted to fund the Vietnam War and the Great Society programs while keeping gold artificially cheap by selling their collective reserves whenever the market price rose. It worked for 6 years. The experts of the day called it a triumph of central bank cooperation. But by 1967, the physical reality began to overwhelm the paper promises. France, led by Charles de Gaulle, realized the game was rigged and began demanding physical gold instead of paper dollars. The drain on the vaults became a torrent. On March 14, 1968, the demand for gold hit $400 million in a single day. The London gold pool collapsed 48 hours later. The market was closed, a bank holiday was declared, and when it reopened, the two-tier pricing system was born. The official price remained a fiction for central banks, while the real price exploded in the free market. Sound familiar? It is the exact same bifurcation we are seeing today between New York and Shanghai. Then, we must look at the silver crisis of 1980. The Hunt brothers, 2 Texas oil billionaires, realized the same thing the Chinese realize today. Paper currency is a melting ice cube. They began buying physical silver and taking delivery of futures contracts, cornering nearly 1/3 of the world's privately held supply. The price rocketed from $6 to $50 an ounce. The shorts, the big bullion banks, were facing total annihilation. How did the system survive in 1980? They changed the rules in the middle of the game. The COMEX introduced Silver Rule 7, which restricted trading to liquidation only. They hiked margin requirements to 50%, effectively cutting off the oxygen to the longs while allowing the shorts to escape. They used regulatory force to crush the physical demand. But here is the critical difference between 1980 and today. In 1980, the Fed and the COMEX were fighting 2 brothers from Texas. Today, they are fighting the sovereign state of China and a global industrial machine that requires silver for its very survival. You can change the rules to stop a speculator, but you cannot change the rules to stop a vacuum cleaner. You cannot pass a regulation that creates silver atoms out of thin air. When the London gold pool failed, gold went from $35 to $850 in a decade. When the Hunt brothers' squeeze was suppressed, it only delayed the inevitable realization of silver's scarcity. Today, we are at the end of a 40-year cycle of suppression. The Fed's $3 billion injection this morning is the final, desperate gasp of a system that has run out of gold, run out of silver, and is finally running out of lies. History tells us that when the vault hits zero, the price goes to infinity. We are 48 hours away from that moment of truth. We are witnessing a fundamental collision between 2 different definitions of value. In the West, wealth has become a collection of digits, lines of code on a bank server, leveraged derivatives, and paper promises backed by more paper. But in the East, led by the strategic planners in Beijing, wealth is being redefined by atoms. They understand that you can print $3 billion in a single morning, as the Fed did today. But you cannot print the 1,318,186 troy ounces of silver that just left the Shanghai vaults. Why is China so aggressive in its pursuit of physical silver? It is because silver is no longer just a precious metal for jewelry or investment. It is the essential oxygen of the modern industrial machine. We are living through the most significant technological transformation since the Industrial Revolution. 3 independent megatrends are converging in 2025: the energy transition, the electrification of transport, and the explosion of artificial intelligence. Silver sits at the absolute center of all 3. Look at the data from the solar industry. In 2024, solar energy alone consumed over 240 million ounces of silver. In 2025, that number is projected to surpass 300 million ounces. Why? Because silver is the most electrically conductive metal on the periodic table. While copper can be used, silver provides a 5.8% higher electrical conductivity. In a world of thin margins and efficiency mandates, that 5.8% is the difference between a viable power grid and a failing one. China produces 80% of the world's solar panels. They have realized that controlling the silver supply is equivalent to controlling the global energy market of the future. Then, consider the automotive sector. A traditional internal combustion engine vehicle uses about 20 grams of silver. An electric vehicle requires between 30 and 50 grams. With the rapid acceleration of electric vehicle production, automotive silver demand is growing at a compound annual rate of over 3%. If solid-state battery technology reaches commercial scale in the next few years, each battery pack could require up to 1 kilogram of silver. China is not just buying silver to trade it. They are stockpiling it as a strategic defense for their automotive dominance. Finally, we must talk about the artificial intelligence revolution. Every high-performance AI chip, every server in a massive data center, and every high-speed networking interface relies on silver-based conductive pastes and thermal management systems. As the world builds out the infrastructure for AI, the demand for these high-density components is exploding. Elon Musk himself warned just days ago that manufacturers could suffer devastating consequences from the surge in silver prices. He knows that his factories in Austin and Shanghai are at the mercy of the physical metal supply. The West is fighting a war of digits, trying to manage the price through the COMEX and the printing press, but the East is winning the war of atoms. They are withdrawing 41 tons at a time because they know that when the export ban hits in 48 hours, the world will realize that paper dollars cannot build a solar panel or power an AI server. We are moving from an era of financial engineering to an era of resource reality. In this new world, the one who holds the atoms dictates the terms to the one who only holds the digits. As we stand on the final day of 2025, the global financial community is staring directly at a cliff edge. In less than 24 hours, on January 1st, 2026, the most restrictive silver export controls in modern history will go live in China. While the mainstream media treats this as a minor bureaucratic change, the data suggests it is a structural earthquake that will remove 60 to 70% of the world's tradable refined silver from the international market overnight. We are not just talking about a policy shift. We are talking about the end of the global silver supply chain as we know it. The specifics of the announcement from China's Ministry of Commerce are designed for total state control. Starting tomorrow, silver will no longer be traded as an ordinary commodity. It has been elevated to the status of a strategic mineral, alongside rare earth metals like tungsten and antimony. To export silver from China, a company must now obtain a specific government license. But the requirements for these licenses are so stringent that only a handful of massive, state-sanctioned firms will qualify. Any exporter must produce at least 80 tons annually and maintain credit lines exceeding $30 million. This effectively wipes out the small and mid-sized independent exporters who have provided the essential liquidity to Western markets for decades. Why has Beijing chosen this specific moment to shut the tap? The timing coincides with a meeting between the United States and Chinese leaders in South Korea, where the two superpowers are renegotiating the terms of global trade. By restricting silver, China is deploying a weapon of industrial mass destruction. They know that the West is currently in its fifth consecutive year of a structural silver deficit. Global demand for 2025 reached 1,240,000,000 ounces, while mining supplies struggle to hit 1 billion ounces. By locking their refined silver inside their borders, China is not just protecting their own industry, they are creating an immediate, unsolvable shortage for the rest of the world. The reaction from industry leaders has been one of pure alarm. Elon Musk recently broke his silence on social media, stating that the situation is not good and emphasizing that silver is an irreplaceable input for solar panels, electric vehicles, and high-density electronics. Musk knows that his gigafactories are built on the assumption of a steady, cheap flow of silver atoms. Without Chinese exports, the cost of the green energy transition and the AI revolution will skyrocket. We are already seeing the results of this anticipation. Physical silver in Shanghai is now trading at over $80 an ounce, while the Western paper markets at $75 are left wondering why no metal is arriving. Tomorrow, the window for moving metal out of China slams shut. The 41 tons that vanished from the Shanghai vaults yesterday were the last scraps to leave the building before the security guards arrived. For the Western banks who have sold thousands of paper claims against a dwindling pile of physical bars, January 1st represents the end of the line. You cannot build a future on paper promises when the only country with the metal decides to keep it for themselves. The cliff is here, the drop is vertical, and the physical era begins at midnight. We have arrived at the most dangerous phase of any financial collapse, the counterparty death spiral. In the world of high finance, a market doesn't just end when the price goes up. It ends when the institutions that facilitate the trade can no longer trust one another to fulfill their promises. Today, as the Federal Reserve injected $3 billion and China withdrew 41 tons, the invisible thread of trust that holds the Western silver market together snapped. We are no longer dealing with a simple supply shortage. We are dealing with a systemic solvency crisis. To understand this, you must understand counterparty risk. When you buy a silver contract on the COMEX, you are not buying silver. You are buying a promise from a clearinghouse. That clearinghouse, in turn, relies on the promises of the big commercial banks. This chain works perfectly until the price moves too violently or the physical metal disappears. At that point, the leverage of 4,000 to 1 becomes a weapon of mass destruction. If the price of silver gaps up because China has locked the gates, the banks that are short silver face margin calls in the billions. If one of those banks cannot pay, The clearinghouse itself is on the hook. This is exactly what the Fed was trying to prevent at 8:15 this morning. The $3 billion injection was a desperate attempt to stop a chain reaction of defaults. If a major bank defaults on its silver obligations, every other bank it trades with is suddenly exposed. This is the Lehman Brothers moment for the precious metals market. In 2008, it was subprime mortgages that triggered the collapse. In 2025, it is the physical silver vacuum. The risk has moved from the trading desks to the very plumbing of the banking system. We are now entering a feedback loop. As the banks become more desperate for cash to cover their silver losses, they sell other assets like treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, as we saw this morning. This selling drives up interest rates and puts pressure on the repo market, which in turn makes it harder for the banks to borrow the cash they need. It is a spiral that feeds on itself. Meanwhile, industrial buyers, seeing the instability, are bypassing the paper markets entirely and taking physical delivery at any cost. This removes the final remaining bars from the vaults, making it impossible for the banks to settle their paper contracts with anything but cash. But here is the final blow. In a hyperinflationary environment or a systemic crisis, cash is the one thing no one wants. If the COMEX declares force majeure and tells investors they will be settled in paper dollars instead of physical silver, the trust in the entire exchange evaporates instantly. This is the moment of implosion. The counterparty death spiral ends when there are no counterparties left who can deliver. The Fed can print $3 billion, or even $3 trillion, but they cannot print the trust required to make a paper promise as valuable as a 41-ton bar of silver. The era of unallocated accounts and paper claims is dying, and those left holding the paper will find themselves standing at the end of a very long line with nothing in their hands. As we reach the final hours of 2025, the evidence is no longer a matter of speculation. It is a matter of mathematics. The Federal Reserve has signaled its desperation with a $3 billion injection. China has signaled its dominance by withdrawing 41 tons of physical metal and locking the export gates. The gap between the $75 paper price and the $80 physical reality is the final warning for any investor still holding on to the illusions of the old system. The question is no longer what is happening, but what are you going to do about it before the clock strikes midnight on January 1st? Your first and most urgent priority is the elimination of counterparty risk. If you have silver in unallocated bank accounts or pool programs, you must understand that in the eyes of the law, you are not an owner. You are an unsecured creditor. Today's repo market panic proves that even the largest institutions are only one bad morning away from a liquidity freeze. If a bank becomes insolvent, your unallocated silver will be liquidated to pay the bank's general creditors, and you will be left with a fraction of your investment in depreciating paper dollars. If you do not hold the metal in your physical possession or in a fully allocated, segregated vault outside the banking system, you do not own it. The second pillar of your strategy must be to ignore the paper price smash. In the next 48 hours, as the banks become cornered animals, expect extreme volatility. They may try to use their remaining paper leverage to push the COMEX price down to $70 or even $65 to trigger stop losses and scare you into selling. Do not blink. Look at the premiums in Shanghai. Look at the 755-ton inventory lows. The paper price is a lie designed to steal your atoms. In a world where China has turned off the tap, the price is not what the screen says. It is what the dealer requires to actually hand you a bar. Third, you must prepare for a no-offer market. We have seen this in history during the collapse of the London gold pool and the 1980 silver squeeze. There comes a moment when the price doesn't just go up, the supply simply vanishes. Dealers will stop selling, mints will go into backorder for months. If you have been waiting for a better entry point, realize that the window is closing. It is better to be a year early than a single day late when a sovereign export ban takes effect. Finally, view your silver not as a trade, but as insurance for the next decade. We are moving into a period of prolonged currency debasement and industrial resource wars. The transfer of wealth from those who hold digits to those who hold atoms is the defining theme of 2026. By holding physical silver, you are opting out of a fraudulent financial system and into a hard asset reality that the Federal Reserve cannot print and that the global industrial machine cannot live without. The alert is over. The data has been presented. The main beam has cracked, and the countdown to January 1st is almost at zero. This is the moment where the smart money separates from the crowd. One side is holding 3 billion freshly printed dollars. The other side is holding 41 tons of real wealth. Choose your side wisely. The fireworks are about to begin.